السلام عليكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. What about the methodology? Dr. Hani, you keep talking about the methodology. Methodology this, methodology that, organic methodology, Quranic methodology. The answer, when you apply the methodology, you make yourself available to receive the understanding directly from Allah. It is not from the text. Let me repeat it. The methodology is not to be used to unlock portions of the text. Yes, I used that expression before to try to simplify the discourse that we were engaged in various segments. But the methodology is primarily to work on you. The methodology is a discipline that you have to go through to make sure you don't get misled and to make sure that you're making yourself available to receive the guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is a summary of the steps of the organic methodology. Remember, the organic methodology is not to unlock the code of the text. The organic methodology is a discipline you apply to yourself. So here I'm sharing with you some of the steps, not all of them, some of the steps that I go through, and I encourage you to start understanding, to go through yourself. First, we need to learn to read the Quran. What does that mean? It's not just reciting the Quran. It is not just mouthing the enunciation of the words and the sounds that result from the text. And I apologize for breaking this to you, but most of us who don't understand what we're reading are really not reading. We are uttering, we are pronouncing the words and the characters and the vowels and the accents and so on, but we're not really reading. To read the Quran means that you're fully engaged with every word you look at. When the Quran asks you a question, you stop and you try to answer that question. When the Quran says, "Inna fi dhalika la-ayah," in this we have just given you a sign, you stop and you say, "Where's that ayah? I need to learn it." When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, "I've just given you evidence," you look for it and you say, "Okay, I missed it. I need to stop. I cannot proceed before I really engage that evidence Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just gave me," and so on. So reading is a proactive, very engaged process. It is not just a passive, you're listening with the ear or you're enunciating with the tongue, but nothing is getting through to the heart. Reading is fully being there, connected with the text of the Quran. That's the first step. Observing intently every character, the way a word is drawn or written, the way a sentence is split across two ayah, the way the Quran is making reference to something that you're not aware of. Every single observation has to be caught, and you develop this sense of observation over time. This is not going to happen overnight. This is not going to happen in one sitting or even 1 year. Sometimes it takes 20 years, 40 years for some people to really extract enough abilities of observation to appreciate the variations in the Quran. So this takes time, but it is part of the process and we have to learn it. We have to make sure that we start observing it. Those of you who have contacted me to try to learn some of these aspects that we talk about in this channel, this is the process I put them through. I put them through learning to observe, learning to link the verses of the Quran, learning to notice variations that most people don't even notice. This is a very important part of understanding this process that we're talking about, this organic methodology. Again, one more time, the methodology is to work on you. Methodology is not to be applied to the text. It's not an instrument you apply. It is not a magnifying glass that allows you to see more. It's none of that. Methodology improves your ability to receive, improves your availability and your humbleness to be able to receive the mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with this divine rain. So by observing intently, the Quran will teach you, the text, the scriptural text will start to teach you, and it becomes like software that impacts you. So now you pay attention to the style, to the various terms, to the various grammatical inflections, to the various way of delineating sentences. Every possible aspect of the text itself becomes a teacher for you, and it changes you. And now you develop a certain amount of knowledge that other people don't have. Additionally, you have to ask specific and daring questions. Daring in the sense that there is something you don't understand. Even if you read it in some tafsir or you read it in some translation, does not make sense. Make a note of it. Do the due diligence in order to open your Weltanschauung to be receptive. By asking question, remember, you're recognizing that your umniya, your schema, one or more, and your Weltanschauung need repair. And therefore, by asking questions, you're allowing yourself to be ready to receive. You're emptying the cup. You're saying, my cup is full of junk. I need to pour it out, to dump it, and start to receive fresh, new water, fresh, new ma from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What else? You keep reading and you keep observing, and you keep reading and you keep observing, and you make dua. There will be a set of dua, inshallah, that we will reveal in the future. We've revealed some of them already in some of the earlier segments. You can go back to them. You also have to fulfill all of your ibadat, all of them. Everything that the Prophet ﷺ used to do, especially charity. Nothing unlocks your Weltanschauung to receive like charity. Nothing. And that's why Ita' zakat is constantly repeated throughout the whole Quran. It's very important to do charity, sadaqah, to do zakat, to cleanse, to give out some of your possessions, or maybe more than some of your possessions, because it cleanses you from attachment. Attachment to material things is the worst type of attachment, but attachment to existing understanding is just as bad. And in order to practice detachment as far as the wrong understanding, you have to practice detachment in terms of material wealth and material possessions that you have. You also have to wait and not rush. You shouldn't ever say, I'm not receiving. You should always ask, okay, I'm not receiving because of something in me. What do I have to do to make myself more worthy to receive? And don't give up. Don't feel hopeless. Don't feel disconnected from Allah. Keep on the path. Stay on the path. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised us, and He never misses on His promise. And you have to have that concept of certainty built into your process, into your whole methodology. When you receive dhikra, and we've talked about dhikra before, it's this spontaneous aha moment, this flash of insight that comes to you seemingly from nowhere. So this process is individual, but it's also collective. It's for the whole ummah. And that's why we are sharing all of this on this channel. We want everyone to be engaged in this process, to learn and to understand, so that we can grow the amount of knowledge and the amount of maturity and awareness within the ummah. And inshallah, you will be a part of this. And that's why we're sharing all of this information. When you receive dhikra, such a flash of insight, or an opinion that comes out of nowhere, an aha moment, don't rush. Don't fall into the trap of becoming enamored with it, becoming in love with it, becoming insistent. This is the right answer. No, stop. This is the most dangerous part, where you have to really stop and show patience. You have to accept maybe this is not the right answer. So how do you know that? How do you decide if it is a right or wrong answer? There are two more steps. The first step is confirmation. The second step is verification. I can't get into a lot of details in this segment, but I will tell you very briefly. The confirmation means that if this idea is correct, it has to apply across the whole Quran, all the ayat where this term or this concept or this idea may be applicable. So you have to do more research. You have to hold that idea as a hypothesis. Conjecture is the word that's used in scientific circles. So this is a conjecture, and you say, okay, possible, it's plausible. That's what we did in part 2 of the series. We said it's plausible. Now we have to prove it. And we go through all of the other ayat, we go through all of the contexts, we go through all of the implications, what's called implicature, and you see if it holds water. The concept of verification deals with finding other aspects of the same idea and other things that relate to this idea, and trying to find corroborating evidence to match this new understanding you just developed with this conjecture. Again, this is something that we cannot elaborate fully in this segment, but inshallah we will develop more understanding for them in future segments, inshallah. All right, we continue inshallah with the methodology foundation example number 5. As we said before, the organic Quranic methodology is not something you apply to the scriptural text of the Quran, as in the model of the Western hermeneutics. It is something you apply on yourself. It is something you use to keep yourself objective, to keep yourself disciplined, to keep yourself from making mistakes and falling prey to your shaitan. As we engage the Quran, we have to ensure that we're following the process carefully, not to fall into the mistakes that other people have made. This is very similar to the scientific method. Scientific method doesn't really allow you to unlock the secrets. It just makes sure that you don't make mistakes. So in that sense, verification is a must. In the philosophy of science, this concept is referred to as Karl Popper's falsification principle. And again, I'm not going to say much. Those of you who are familiar with these issues will appreciate that we use these principles within the Quranic methodology. Finally, there's a lot more to this methodology. It is not just about the few steps that we just discussed. There are principles, there is a special type of vocabulary that the Quran teaches us about this methodology. There are certain guardrails that we have to be careful with, and so on. There's a lot more detail, but this will give you a helicopter view of everything that we follow. And as you can tell, it's an intensive process. It's not a simple process. It is a process that takes time and takes discipline. And remember, we're engaging the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so we can't make light of this. We continue with the methodology foundation. This methodology, which is a discipline, is referred to by the Quran as As-Sirat al-Mustaqim. And this is something that's going to be a surprise to most of you. The word As-Sirat al-Mustaqim has been interpreted by various mufassirun, or people who talked about the Quran as this narrow path between Jannah and Nar and all of this stuff, and it is not based on the Quran whatsoever. The word Mustaqim includes this letter Ta, which refers to the self. The self. That means you apply it to yourself. So it is your own istiqamah. It's your own self-correction. Correction of the self. Mustaqim. And notice that I did not put a hyphen between self and correcting. It is correcting the self. This is how the Quran must act on you like software. Again, we will detail this concept a lot more, inshallah, in upcoming series. By misunderstanding the concept of As-Sirat al-Mustaqim, and by not even looking for it in the Quran, most of the books of tafsir made mistakes. They went wrong in their approach. And most of you have asked me, how come all of those other mufassirun did not get it right, and you're trying to tell us that you are on the right path? Well, watch this and learn, and inshallah you will agree. You will see for yourself where they went wrong. Most of the mufassirun applied the style of the poets. They did not apply the styles of the Quran. They did not allow the Quran to teach them the ways and the habits of the Quran, the style of how it uses terms and expressions and pronouns, and where it delineates the sentences, and how it relates and links the various stories. All of this unique literary style of the Quran was not taken in consideration. They came into interpreting any verse by thinking ahead of time that this verse must match the style of the poets. And therefore, they viewed the Quran as a text that included the understanding and the meaning within it. And that was the first mistake they made. The second mistake they made is they brought everything they learned from the style of the poets and applied them to the Quran, as if the poets dominate over the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They were correct according to their preconceived notions of what style they should use to interpret the Quran. But they were wrong according to the instructions given within the Quran. So the Quran told us specifically, do not follow the ways of the poets. In Surah Ash-Shu'ara, وَالشُّعَرَاءُ يَتَّبِعُهُمْ الْغَاوُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was very clear. Don't follow the ways of the poets. Finally, the more a scholar is entrenched in the style of the poets, in other words, the more an Islamic or Quranic scholar has invested time in learning the poetry of the Arabs, the further and the harder it shall be for him to return to understand the Quran on its own term, in its own style. And I know this is a big claim I'm making, but if you really think about it, you'll understand what I'm talking about. His Weltanschauung is so preloaded with all sorts of wrong assumptions that when he comes into the Quran, he will not be able to recognize the different style that the Quran is using for its own expression, for its own composition. Watch this ayah and you will be the judge for yourself. In Surah At-Tawbah, ayah 97, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, الأعراب أشد كفرا ونفاقا وأجدر ألا يعلموا حدود ما أنزل الله على رسوله والله عليم حكيم. It is talking about the Arabs, and some disagreement exists regarding the translation of the word Al-A'rab. But Al-A'rab are those who use the language of the poet, who are entrenched in that style. They, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, أجدروا, they are أجدروا ألا يعلموا. They are too competent in the wrong style to accept the evidence for the linguistic boundaries of what Allah has made accessible upon His Messenger. Now some of my Arab brothers will say the linguistic boundaries, it's talking about hudud. That's exactly what hudud means. And when we described hadid, which is from the gerund hadda or hadada, is to provide the boundaries. And the boundaries of the linguistic style of the Quran. So hadid in the Quran is not referring to the metal, to iron, or to iron ore. It is referring to the boundaries of what the words of the Quran are supposed to indicate. And therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, the more you learn the wrong ways, the harder it shall be to understand the ways of the Quran. Because you've already preloaded your cup. Your cup is so full. You're so full of yourself, so to speak. You're so full of the style of the poets that you will not recognize that the style of the Quran is different. It is a different lisan, and that's what we keep talking about. It is not the lisan of the Arabs. It's an Arabic lisan in its own style. It is a style based on the pure Arabic language, not the language of the Arab poets. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues, Allah is the source of learning and the source of Quranic linguistic discernment. The word Hakim is from Hukm, which is the linguistic discernment according to the Abrahamic locution. As you can see, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us very clearly, it's using the word Ajdar. Ajdar, that means they're more competent. Yes, they are more competent, but in the wrong ways. They're not competent in the ways of the Quran. They're not coming into the Quran ready to learn its style. They're ready to learn its ways of expressions. And the example I give you here, and you need to internalize this really, because this is so important. Imagine you bring an alchemist from the medieval ages. Those alchemists understood chemistry based on the model of the four elements: earth, fire, air, and water. So everything in their opinion must fit into these four categories. Now imagine you bring an alchemist from the medieval ages and you expose him to Mendeleyev's table of elements. Mendeleev, by the way, is a Russian brilliant chemist who died in 1907. He developed the table of elements. Imagine you expose that medieval alchemist to what Mendeleev produced. He will reject it beforehand, because in the mind of the alchemist, the world is defined using a different model, a different style. There's no way for that medieval scholar, medieval chemist, medieval alchemist, medieval mufassir to come and submit without giving up everything he learned from his medieval sciences. This is exactly the same thing that this ayah is saying. Unless you give up your competencies, what you think are competencies, what you think are treasures you've learned, you have to give them up, because you have to submit to the style of the Quran, not to the style of the poets. You don't submit the Quran to the poets. You submit your knowledge to the style of the Quran. I urge you to subscribe, like, and share, and please leave respectable comments below. We close with the dua. Alhamdulillah alladhi hadana lihada wa ma kunna linahtadiya lawla an hadana Allah laqad ja'at rusul rabbina bil haqq. Thank you very much for watching. Salamun alaykum.